I'm not very good. So I asked my friend, Hesse. He's a scientist. He has been traveling internationally. He's on international platform to give talks in Switzerland and all the places. He do a lot of research. He wrote a book on this subject. So I have to say that I'll invite him and I thank him for his generosity to come over and share with us today. And this is very important. Lots and Science Part 1 and Part 2. So if you would like to, you can continue Part 2. Part 2 dealing a lot more spirituality. Okay? So this one will give you a really comprehensive taste of science and how science and theology are really complementary. And over to Deacon Bob, and then I come in and out with me, you know, but he's the main speaker.
The least of
the word.
Thank you, Father. It's an honor being here. And it's wonderful to talk to catechists because I can tell you, as you probably know.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a loudmouth. As you probably know already, the youth is leaving the church. And what I have found in this subject is there's a tremendous hunger from the youth to hear this because they think science is contradicting faith. And it isn't. In fact, there's a convergence taking place. It'll never converge completely because they answer different questions. So basically, there are two sections. There's the part 1, which is this morning. And we're going to talk about revelation and principles to kind of set the groundwork. And this is kind of a summary of a graduate course that I taught at the University of St. Thomas. Then we're going to go to physics to creation, and then chemistry to life, and then we'll have questions and answers. Now, Sister Marie Moretti was concerned that she wanted to have your group also hear the second part. And the second part is only going to be attended by 13 people or so. So what I'm going to do, I just got her permission, is to cut the questions and answers short and go right into part 2. And I don't know how far I'll get, but we'll do our best. Now the reason I did it in this sequence is there is an overlap. There is talking about the universe actually leads to prayer, and it's kind of a strange thing. You may not understand that, but we're going to go to biology of consciousness, psychology, and mysticism if we can make it through. Basically, each section is going to be broken with a slide so you know what I'm moving from one section to the next. Revelation. God reveals himself in 3 ways, through scripture, tradition, and nature. And quite often, we don't focus on nature. It is the oldest form of revelation there is. And I gave those dates just as rough dates of when verbal tradition started, when Jesus' ministry started, etc. So we're going to focus on nature, and there are a lot of schools, even seminaries, that are just starting to do this. We're going to go on a basis of non-dualism, and that is very fundamental to our Catholic belief, that the faith and reason are meant to go hand in hand, body and soul are meant to be interstitial and meant for each other, and God and man. And so that's a principle that is not followed by all faiths. For example, Buddhism believes in dualism. That's why they can kill their body under certain circumstances, because they're going to get another one. That's not our Catholic teaching. So, faith and science agreement. Science can purify religion from error and superstition. Religion can purify science from false absolute. Same quote John Paul. Should have put it in there. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Einstein. Now, there are 2 extremes we want to avoid. Fundamentalism, which is literal interpretation of Scripture. You run into fundamentalists. This is an extreme that we're not going to take. Scientism also has this extreme, and that is everything to be understood through science, which you will find out as we go along. Science doesn't even agree with that. There are different questions being answered. Faith is the why, science is the how, but they're complementary as we dance through. And I'm going to go through more of the science and then touch on the Scripture, and I want you to kind of pull it together in your head as we go along. This is key. Miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature. St. Augustine of Hippo. Now, if you're like me when I was young, I thought that a miracle was an exception to the laws of nature. That's kind of insulting to God. I mean, the miracle is here. This is the miracle. It's just that we don't know it and understand it completely. And so God's inviting us, as St. Augustine would have said here. He's inviting us to study it in more detail. So, unfortunately, I'm going to try to stay away from math, but we're going to be dealing with big numbers. So, some of you may not be aware of this already, some of you may be, but the speed of light is critical, 186,000 miles per second. And a light year is the distance light travels in a year. Or the 10 to the 12 actually means number 12 zeros after this. So you move it over 12 places, which has been done here, and that's 5.9 trillion miles, one light year, 5.9 trillion. Now, if this was a 10 to the minus 12, which you'll see some numbers like that, then it's zero, the decimal point would be moved over this way, making the number extremely small. So, we're going to play a little imaginative game here. We're going to pretend we're outside the universe. I'm going to explain later that's a bizarre thought, why. But right now, we're going to pretend we're outside the universe and we've got a telephoto lens and we're zeroed in on Earth. And we're going to start backing up until we get to a wide-angle lens to embrace the whole universe. That was Earth, okay? Now, if you look at the solar planets in our solar system, Earth has gotten quite a bit smaller. Now, our solar system, if you add the sun, and maybe we should turn the lights out of here. But can we turn them off? Great, thank you. Maybe that helps. The Earth is here. See the little arrow? Minuscule in our solar system, okay? Other stars. Now suddenly you don't even see Earth. You're just talking about our sun, which was already gigantic, compared to these. These are 1,000 light years away, the 15th brightest, and 5.8 quadrillion miles. Immense, and we're still in our galaxy. Now there are other planets, but scientists don't know how many. There's a guess. They think there are as many as 100 billion planets. There's possibly 17 billion similar to Earth in our galaxy. But we don't know. Between galaxies, there is interstellar nebula. This is the Eskimo Nebula, 5,000 light years away. Then there's the Milky Way that everybody, if you're out in the country and there's no city lights, you'll see stars all over the place. What you're really looking at is the tail of our galaxy. We are actually here. Our sun is here on the tail of our galaxy. Now, this is the Milky Way Galaxy, and there's no way we could have gotten a photograph of that because we can't get outside and look in. But this is a rendition of what it is and how far across. 100,000 light years across times 5.9 trillion miles. Get the whole of the size of this? Okay. 200 billion stars in our galaxy. But there are other galaxies, not just ours. This is the Sombrero Galaxy. They get these names because of the way they look. This one is 28 billion light years away, 50,000 light years across, 800 billion stars. I want to get a feel for the magnitude because God is all. A-W-E, God is all. Now, this was the Hubble Ultra Deep Field test from the Hubble spacecraft. Now, if you held up a dime to the night sky, you would see an area that big. Now, that looks like a lot of stars, right? Those are galaxies. Those are other galaxies. Just through a little dime at arm's length. So the visible universe that we just talked about has somewhere between 200 and 700 plus billion stars per galaxy. We have no idea what that is. People will try to say, well, our galaxy's average, that would be 200 billion, but we don't know. There are approximately 100 to 170 plus billion galaxies. Are you with me here? This is getting mind-blowing, okay? And that means, with a little math, that there's anywhere from 20 to 1,190 billion trillion stars. And you eat this up, but the punchline hasn't come yet. What is the total universe? Well, what we just described, all those galaxies, all those stars, is only 4% of the universe. We can only see 4% of the universe. The other is dark matter and dark energy. We can't see it. Are we getting a sense of the magnitude here? It's mind-boggling. We know these exist because the effects they have on the visible matter. So there's ways of measuring this. And of course, black holes at the center of our galaxy is a black hole that holds all the stuff in because it's creating gravitational force while the disk is spinning. It's like taking a rock on a string and spinning it. Okay, the string is the gravitation, and the rock going out is the centrifugal force setting it out. So they got to be in balance. So this is a faint red object in the massive galaxy 10 or greater than 10 billion light years away. And because of the light here, this is actually an enlargement of a little square, and it has been enlarged. We're looking at this galaxy as it existed 10 billion years ago, because it took 10 billion light years to get to us. So we're looking back in time, and we don't know what's going on right now. It's been 10 billion years since this showed up. Now, we talked about dark energy and dark matter, remember? Well, there was a law that the scientists thought of matter and energy being constant. There was no interchange. And this is the only equation I'm going to give you, but it's critical. Matter and energy, there used to be the law called conservation of matter and energy, meaning that you had matter and you had energy, and they were conserved, they were always constant. Einstein comes along and says, oh no, they're interchangeable. And you got to get a sense of this here now. Energy is here, mass is there, and the speed of light, that number squared, is gigantic. Okay, so when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, you were talking about 25 pounds of fissionable material. 25 pounds is not very much. You multiply it by that, and you wipe out the city. This explains our sun, why it doesn't seem to run out. It's a nuclear reaction. Now, Einstein had a good feel for this. He had a general relativity theory. And, boy, this is not good. This is not good. Okay, is there a brighter light behind this? Believe me, I'll describe it. What he did is he came up with another interpretation of, yeah, great, that would be a good idea. He came up with another interpretation of Newton's theory of gravity. And basically what he thought about was that the space-time continuum was bendable. And it's not obvious from this, but this is Earth in a dimple. It's like you had a sheet and you put a heavy rock in it and it dips down. Okay? Now, if you put a piece of marble and throw it on that sheet, what's going to happen? It's going to roll around that dimple right down to the heavy object in the middle. So mass is affected by gravity. Okay? Now, the other thing that's affected is energy. So we talk about mass and energy, material in what we couldn't see in the universe. Light is also bent. So you may be, the light source may be here, and you're observing here, and you think, well, you're seeing it, but it's actually bending. Light bends around heavy objects, because the light also is affected by gravity. Okay, Bob? Technology is wonderful. I another piece of equipment. It's okay now. Okay. Okay. Now we talked about curved space and time. Okay. What effect does that have? We're getting to the religion part. Trust me. You gotta go through the sides. Okay. Okay. There was a time when people thought. Okay, where's that? There was a time when people thought that the Earth was flat. There's still a flat Earth society, believe it or not. Yet the Greeks knew it was round. And most people ignored the Greeks because they were into the science, astronomy. So, anyway, people thought that you walked and you fell off the edge. Well, the truth is, the person walking around the Earth comes back the other side. Well, because space-time is curved, it's like walking on the inside of a basketball instead of the outside. This would be like walking on the outside of a basketball. Walking on the inside would be the universe. So that if you had the time and the propellant, which we don't have, and you went one direction, you'd come back the other direction. And what's interesting is you would never sense an edge to the universe. When people say to you, what's outside the universe, it's a nonsensical question. And the reason is that we are trapped in the dimensions of space and time. We don't know what it's like without that. It would be like asking a fish, what's it like to swim without water? If this fish could talk, he'd say, what are you crazy? What does that mean? You know? Well, obviously the Creator is outside space and time. So when we talk about eternal life, in a sense, our language is getting in the way, because eternal means time forever. What we're talking about is something that we cannot conceive of outside. Now, electromagnetic energy was the second thing that Einstein considered, and it has a spectrum across various wavelengths. The visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum is only 1/10 trillionth of the total spectrum. Our vision is very limited. So, yes, we developed equipment to look over here and convert the signals to visible so we can see it. But the truth is, our range is very minimal. So Einstein decided he wanted to have an equation, and he called it the unified theory, and he said, I want to put together an equation that will be one equation that will cover both gravity and electromagnetic energy. He only knew of those two forces. There are two more that were discovered later. And the two more that were discovered later became four forces, and you've heard of string theory and membrane theory equations. That was the latest attempt to come up with one equation, a unified equation, that would describe the universe. Well, he came up with an equation. I don't want to blow the punchline just a second here. He came up with an equation, but the equation predicted that the universe had a beginning. Now, Einstein was susceptible to confirmation bias, and we're going to talk about that this afternoon, or if I get to it. He had paradigms, and he put a fudge factor in the equation, which means that he put in a factor just to force it to not predict a beginning, because he thought the universe was infinite forever. Well, Father Lemaitre, also a physicist, met with Einstein and convinced him that his first equation was correct. And he got him to take the fudge factor out, which predicted a beginning to the universe. So Father Lemaitre is considered the father of the Big Bang Theory. He's a Jesuit physicist. So the Big Bang Theory projected that there was going to be a huge expansion. It actually is not like a regular funnel. It was bigger in the beginning, very quick, and then expanding out. And at various points along the way, things occurred. Okay. Well, this equation enables us to go back and calculate what it was like at the beginning of the Big Bang. And these four forces, what they were like back then. And then there was a stunning discovery, absolutely stunning. What happened is they discovered that those four forces developed into what is called the Anthropic Principle. The four forces of nature were so extremely fine-tuned at the Big Bang that the likelihood of the emergence of a single cell in the universe is like a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling the 747 from the materials therein. Mathematically, Father Spitzer is wonderful in this regard. Mathematically, that's a chance in 1 in 10 to the 10th to the 123rd. The number is so gigantic, you can't even do 10 to a number. You've got to do it double. This number is mind-boggling. Just trust me, it's just mind-boggling. What's the likelihood that life would come about? Well, it's clear that God was preparing for us right from the beginning. So, I'll cover some of the scripture as we get into it more. Now, special relativity was something Einstein came up with, and this is an experiment and this is the mind experiment that Einstein did, and he did these things like most scientists do. It's a mind experiment first. That's what scientists do. They think, well, contrive the experiment, they come up with a picture of what probably will happen, and then they go test it. So he was a patent, he worked in the patent office in Switzerland, and one day he looked out the window and he saw the clock in the square of Switzerland Square, and it said 11:34. Okay? So then Einstein said to himself, well, why am I seeing the clock say 11:34? Well, the sun is there, and it's showing a photon of light. Photon's just a packet of light, and it hits the clock, and then it bounces back to my eye. And that's why I see that it's 11:34. It imprints in the eye, 11:34. Well, that's pretty easy to follow, right? So now, don't be discouraged that people tell you, well, you'll never understand, space-time relativity. It's pretty simple when you think about how Einstein visualized it. So, of course, this is speeding. The photons are coming in at this speed, 186,000 miles per second. So, then Einstein did a leap, a wonderful leap. He said, what if the observer runs backwards at the speed of light? Can I borrow that, please? Let me volunteer. Okay, I'm going to pretend I'm writing 11:34 on this thing, okay? Stand over here. I usually have a little golf ball trying to do this, but I forgot. So I read 11:34. So we're going to catch it. What time does it say on it? 11:34. Okay, now I want you to run backwards at the speed of light. Okay, now what time does it say? 11:34. I'll be darned. So what was the conclusion? Relativity conclusion is at the speed of light, time stands still. Now, this is going to end up in prayer, believe it or not, but this is critical. At the speed of light, time stands still. So now you've got a gentleman, I met the man, he's a physicist in Israel, and here's what he thought about. This is how scientists think. We're a little bit weird, we're off the deep end, but something comes together and we realize this is consistent with my faith belief. On Earth today, the age of the universe is 13.7 billion years. That's my traveling observer. Now, remember I said at the speed of light, time stands still. Well, we're going pretty slow here on Earth. Then, what if you rode the Big Bang wavefront? That Big Bang exploded, and let's say you're riding on the wavefront. Now, that's not, wavefront's not traveling at the speed of light, but it's darn fast and it's accelerating. Gerald Schroeder applied the math with Einstein's theories and determined that the age of the universe would be something like 6.5 to 7 days. Isn't this kind of weird? Where did that come from? Did Genesis have something to say about that? Okay.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not talking about interpreting scripture literally. I'm saying this was his calculation. Isn't that amazing? Okay, now, because of the membrane theory, not just string theory, membrane theory is different dimensions, it's more dimensions. We can go back to the beginning of the universe and predict what happened. And very quickly, at the beginning, minus 10 to the minus 43rd seconds, incredible. Gravity separates, strong nuclear separates, weak nuclear separates. Those are the other two forces I didn't mention. And then helium and hydrogen nuclei are formed, protons, neutrons, etc., pretty early on. Then the first stars develop at 0.4 billion years, and we go on. And our solar system, 9 billion years. So, universe magnitude, where I should count, your designs, they would outnumber the sands. Big Bang, in him all things were created, heaven and earth, energy and matter, things visible and invisible. Does this take on a new meaning now than you had before? Through and into four forces to comprehend with all holy ones what is the breadth, length, and height, and depth. These are the dimensions that are related to the forces. And to know the love of Christ surpasses knowledge. And then the Anthropic Principle. Before I was formed in the womb, I knew you. He knew we were coming. Unless you believe that a tornado is going to go through a junkyard and build a 747. Except for that exception. He knew. He knew us before the Big Bang. Now, it's logical to go to chemistry because now from the singularity, in those first few fractions of a second, atoms were being formed. Where does that take us? Well, atoms to Earth from stars, this is the life chemistry. Hydrocarbons to amino acids, atmospheric logic, there are reasons for that. Amino acids went further through clay templates, and then the story goes unknown. Science doesn't have the answer. There are a whole sequence of events that had to take place. There's a lot of speculation, hypotheses, etc. But one thing's for sure, that in terms of human arrival, and I put a 2 footnote, if the 13.7 billion years is a 24-hour clock, humans arrive the last 38 seconds. We're latecomers. We are latecomers. Now, have you heard of the Hadron Collider in Switzerland? That's where they speed up subatomic particles around a big magnet. They swing them out. It's called the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Switzerland. And they spin subatomic particles at very high speeds through magnets that change magnetic field. And Peter Higgs predicted that if you did that, you would come to a Higgs boson. And unlike Einstein's original theory where the universe was infinite, well, when he found that it wasn't, that was a shock to him. Well, also the subatomic is not infinite. There is a basic particle that they're searching for. They thought it was this. And you've heard the God particle? Let me tell you, that was a joke. That was a joke by the scientists. They euphemistically called it, what's the God particle? Of course, the press picks it up because the press doesn't know squat about science and makes a joke out of it and takes it seriously, okay? Not knowing it was a joke. So, it had certain, it carries the characteristics of all four forces, and it was discovered in 2012. I was teaching a course on this, and it was in the middle of the course they discovered this. I had to incorporate it. Now, talking about atoms, there's a distinction between quantum mechanics and Newtonian mechanics. Now, Newtonian mechanics said that if you drive your car, you drive to the market, or you just walk to the market. Newtonian physics said that you put your feet in front of each other and you keep walking, right? Well, quantum mechanics in the subatomic, that didn't apply. In the subatomic level, if you were to apply subatomic to our daily lives, and which we don't experience subatomic because we're living where we are, but if you apply the quantum mechanics to the life we live now, it would be like walking to the store and then instantaneously being a block further with no record of passing in between, no time lapsing in between. It would be instantaneous. Wow. I mean, this was hard for physicists to buy because you had to think in terms of things you didn't experience in daily life. So these electrons could jump from one orbit to another in an atom. So this is the nucleus, but you've got these electrons jumping between. Now, what that meant was scientists had to start thinking in terms of probability, not just absolute numbers, which meant that the hydrogen atom, color-coded graphic probability density is an example. They use the color coding to show where is the higher likelihood of the electron to be, okay? Because it had to deal with probability. They didn't know, because it was jumping from here to there. Then comes along Heisenberg in 1927, and he develops the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. What this says, the more precisely the electron position is determined, the less precisely the momentum is known, and vice versa. Now, you may be saying, who cares, so what? This is a deep philosophic switch. Now scientists had to say, and they admit it, they all agree, that nature is such that we cannot know it exactly. Nature is designed so science cannot know it exactly. This is a profound issue, and scientists have accepted this principle as true. Science cannot know nature completely, even though a miracle is an indication we don't know the laws of nature completely. The invisible universe, large, who no human has seen or can see. Visual spectrum at present we see indistinctly as in a mirror, at present partially. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Great is our Lord, his understanding is infinite. He knows it all, we don't, and we can't. Now there's the concept of what's called the non-local universe. Scientists were experimenting with calcium atoms, and they decided to bombard the calcium atoms with energy. And the calcium atoms have a pair of photons that spin off. One's up, one's down, and they spin off. So the scientists decided, well, let's send them in different directions. So they reflected them off 12 kilometers, 7 miles. They changed the spin on one, and instantly the spin changed on the other, not at the speed of light between, because science believes the speed of light is the fastest thing there is, but instantaneously. This is a quantum effect. This holds the potential for communications, because up or down is like the computer language of base 0, base 2. In other words, electricity is on or off, as opposed to our base 10 system where we do that. The Chinese have already applied this to communications over hundreds of miles successfully, so that instead of having a delay in your microphones or your phones, the communication will be instantaneous. The only reason it isn't instantaneous is because it takes technology and equipment to convert the signal to what you hear. This is profound. In theory, this could extend over the total universe. You could be on one side of the universe and instantly communicate to the other side, even though at this current expansion rate, it would take 56 billion light years to traverse from one side to the other. Instantaneous. Einstein said, this is spooky. Einstein said it was spooky, and it's accepted now. Now let's talk about chaos theory.
How is possible?
Huh?
How is possible for us to have that instantaneously communication?
How is it possible? It's part of the quantum effect, and the answer is they don't know. That's the bottom line. But it's a quantum effect. It's not the speed of light. It's not what you're not transferring matter. You're transferring information. Information. You're transferring knowledge. Hang with me. This is leading someplace.
But the solar present system, also he can instantaneously at different places appear to people. I mean, not only people, and even God can instantaneously at different places reveal himself. You know, that means you say that you cannot contain God. God is outside of our own time and space, and that's why God can intervene in any time and space instantaneously. Oh,
That's it. That's it. Listen to this talk ahead of time. Now let's talk about chaos theory. Okay. You had some, the computers came along and they started being really powerful. And they thought, well, the first thing we'll apply to is weather. Because weather is complicated and it costs billions of dollars in lost production of grain and things that are being grown if they could predict bad weather. So they tried and they started to put the input into the computers, and the answers didn't make any sense. And a good scientist looks back at the answers and says, well, does this make any sense? So they discovered then that it was the slightest change in the input changed the output. And basically, they discovered chaos theory. What they called this, in applying it, was the butterfly effect. And as an example, excuse me, as an example, basically what they said is if a butterfly flaps its wings in Beijing, the weather will change in New York. Weird. And what they were saying is there's so many variables we cannot, as human beings, calculate them. We can't even put them in the computer. The result is that chaos is not chaotic. Not chaotic. And then they graphed the results. And they came up with what's called the Mandelbrot Fractals. Now, what this really says is if you take a little piece of this and you blow it up, it'll show the same pattern. It's a bigger picture. And then if you go deeper and deeper and do it again and again and again and again, it's infinitely the same going deep. It's a beautiful, these are beautiful patterns that are clearly not chaos. So chaos is not chaotic. And there's uncertainty in the universe in our minds, but not in God's. Then we're getting to life, okay? Well, I was alive when this happened. It shows how old I am. And I ultimately got a degree in chemistry, so I was interested in this stuff, and molecules were pretty simple back then. When these guys came up with the helix for life, I was blown away. I thought, how in the world did they ever conceive of a double helix? It was just mind-boggling. Now, what are the DNA statistics? DNA contains the complete code for the body. Every DNA. There are 4,600 trillion DNA molecules per human. Pick any one of those DNA and you can make another one of you. Because all of you is in one of those. Each one is 6.5 feet long. DNA molecule is 6.5 feet long. It's ridiculous. And yet it gets into a 9.8 times 10 to the minus 5 inch average cell diameter. Which means that it's a compression ratio of 100,000 to 1. It's mind-boggling. Now, evolutionary theory. Now, obviously, I'm jumping through a lot of topics here. Sorry, but that's just the way this is, okay? Evolutionary theory is not against Catholic teaching, as you know, and it's actually indicative of how we used to think things were static. And one of the biggest mistakes all scientists have made is that things are static and fixed. Einstein the universe has always been here. You know, there was no beginning. It's always here. It's infinite. These are all misstatements, actually misunderstandings of science. Well, evolutionary, the theory of how God created man is partially that way too, because you look at Genesis and you have to interpret that hermeneutically. In other words, it's not just literal, which means that why is God relegated to space and time in a particular instant for creation? He doesn't. So Darwin basically said, and these were his main principles, you don't see them too often, variability, some forms are better adapted than others. Adaptiveness, adaptation and fitness, those forms that are better adapted will lead more offspring and thus increase in population frequency. And natural selection, as environments change, some new form may become better adapted and increase frequency, etc. New species are formed. As it turns out, evolutionary theory is not linear. There are bursts in history, and then there are quiet periods. So, creation is an ongoing process. God is constantly creating us internally, too, which we're going to end up in prayer. And to show the oneness of creation, another human being has 99% of the DNA that you have. Now, both Vietnamese heritage, that may not be true, but between us, it's probably 99%. Okay. Chimpanzees, 97. Cats, 90. Fruit flies, 60%.
Is that with us or the same species?
Pardon me?
Is that with the same species or with us?
This is between species. Look at fruit fly and cats, obviously. So there's a huge sharing in the DNA. Is the DNA a scientific version of the body of Christ?
Can you explain that? That's really
Well, we believe in the body of Christ. We all are part of the body of Christ. We're all have a portion of it. We all have the shared DNA. Where, you know, how deep does that body of Christ go? Primate evolution, I'm not going to spend too much time on evolution because that seems to be, everybody gets all worked up about it. I can't get too worked up about it. I believe it, science accepts it, Catholic Church accepts it, so not a problem. But obviously, we went through evolution through various levels, and then finally humans about 10 million years ago. That's kind of a number you might want to remember. And then there's the modern connection, common ancestries, and that way leads to the various different races. And what's interesting with all this racism stuff you hear in the news, look up the term racism. People are changing the definitions right and left. I'm an old school guy. I mean, there were so many races, and that's it. Anyway. And then the real interesting thing is with DNA evaluation, they show that around Ethiopia was the first human, and then migration then started to take place. The last point was South America. And I've been down on the tip of South America, and I can tell you some of the Indian tribes out there were pretty primitive. So this is migration, not necessarily cultural development. Non-believers, it's LR, you understand? Am I God here again? Only says the Lord, and not God. What you just said, brother?
Yeah.
You know? Where the high created spirit, for your presence, where the flew by, ascend to the heavens. You are there. On high, dwell in holiness with the crushed and dejected spirit, to revive the spirits of the dejected, revive the heart of the crushed. DNA continents. So we are many, or one body in Christ, and individually members of one another.
Yeah. So what I said, you know, we allow the spirit to intervene in the our life, and that was almost like from the eternal point of view, perspective, intervene into our own kind of time and space. And when you are being taken up by that eternal love, then you, from his own perspective, looking at everything, it's no longer chaotic anymore. And then all your life experience is meaningful. That's chaos theory. So it's important for us to understand that when you are entering into a deep intimacy relationship with Christ, and you see everything different. We talk about conversion. people, in the past, you see their wife and husband like this, but after they've been through for instance, mentioned Carl weekend, they begin to be converted intellectually, emotionally, or psychologically, they begin to see everything different. They begin to see order in chaos. And that's the thing. It's important for us to know that science and theology really are not really contradictory, but actually are really complementary, because science reveals the fact that everything we see is within that kind of boundary of time and space, and the universe is not, we are not able to get out of that. And there's a mystery beyond time and space, and that is instantaneously God intervene in our life and pull us away from this kind of limited point of view, and spirituality help us to be able to see deeply, to see profoundly, to engage much more instantaneously with everyone. Not quite the same. St. Francis Assisi, the one who was instantaneously at different places. He was able to perform miracles in different places because he becoming his majority of DNA is Jesus, And so that we need to recognize that we become Christ when we really inviting Him into our life, and that is the mystery, And actually, the Church Vatican II said what? The Church becomes younger if the Church is taken over by the Spirit. That's the love of Christ. And that's why I say the love of Christ, the redeeming love of Christ will heal you and will liberate you. Liberate from the limitation of time and space in your own experience of life, and also transform you. And we rather how about transcend you, go beyond that time and space.
And just to add on to that, basically, that's right, I agree with Bob. It's wonderful. I said we were locked in and trapped into the dimensions of space and time. God can draw us out of those dimensions through contemplative prayer. And so that would be what we would talk next to this afternoon, or as much as I can cover. But it actually can draw us out of space and time. Questions and answers. Now, I asked if you want to just keep rolling.
Yeah,
just keep rolling. Okay.
What time did we end this one?
Well, that's pretty much.
We have to say that when he's comparing, Professor Hesse, or Deacon Hesse, he's a scientist, and he has been doing a lot of research, and he has been traveling in Europe and giving a lot of workshops, conferences, everything there. So when we need to study, we need to really study seriously and then do research. When you just don't talk something which is superficially, you really have to get to know the subject. So when you are preparing your classes, you have to really take it all in and simplify in such a way that when you share the story, the narrative of the church or the story of Christ, and the people can understand it, doesn't matter what ages, what background they have. You see how simplified He make all these complicated subjects to us. Maybe He go a little bit fast, but really good for us to understand the taste of science and the profound mystery of science. Do you want to say something?
Yes, before we finish with part one, I'm just asking, I guess, your help, Professor and Father. There's a lot of theory that you cover. Some really so fast, definitely we can't fully understand. But what would you say is the three takeaway for the group here? If anything you want for the first part anyway, what would be the three things that you want the group to take away?
Of that first presentation.
Yes.
What are the three takeaways?
Let me say it, and then you say what you think. I think for you to understand the chaos theory, a lot of things seem to be chaos when you really take a long look and go deep into it, and you from the perspective of God, you see your life, you see everything, and you see there's order, there's meaning, there's structure in it. And if you from the perspective of theology, if you really have a heart which is filled with Christ's love, when you see it, a lot of experiences in your life seem to be chaotic, seem to be meaningless. But if you take a long look in contemplative prayer, in relationship with Christ, it becomes remaining in Christ, you slowly will see meaning in all the chaotic experiences. Okay, that's the first thing. For me, that's for me. Quantum physics, okay? I mean, instantaneously at different places. God can be instantaneously to relate to all of the people. I mean, how many people in the whole world right now? 60-some billions people. 60-some millions or billions? Billions, okay, that's what I did last time I gave a talk in Taiwan. 60-some billions people. And just imagine, God instantaneously can relate to 60-some billions. Wow. That's, now, quantum physics is possible because God is not limited by time and space. So miracles happen around because we don't understand, we never engage in the experience of that. That's the second one. And the third one is that we need to respect the mystery. We need to be humble because a lot of things. I mean, you know, how many galaxies, how many, the Big Bang in the dark, what you see only 4%. And the 96% of the universe you didn't even see. And you know, how much you see yourself, how much you understand yourself, maybe less than 4%. Psychologists say, the most that we can understand of ourselves is only less than 5% of our consciousness. Our consciousness make up for the unconsciousness, the subconsciousness, the collective unconsciousness and collective subconscious. And then the Buddhist study, they have a 9 level of subconsciousness. You just imagine you yourself a universe in itself. What you see about yourself really what God sees? No. And the sadness, a lot of us, we don't know ourselves, and we go around and tell people, you have to become like me. We learn to be humble. Okay, that's my dream.
Well, I might add that, you know, the question is always, does God intervene in our lives and help? He can do that at the quantum level and not violate the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and also not enable us to figure out what he's doing. And that can lead to, that's on the micro scale. On the macro scale, that can lead to chaos theory, where he's helping us, but we will never be able to measure it.
Yeah.
And so that's another aspect of this. Okay.
That's the redemptive love.
And so I'm going to go into the next section. I've got a little time. I'm not going to review the slides because we already did that. I'm going to jump right to the meat of it here. Biology of consciousness. Okay, the brain has been mapped pretty well. I'm not going to go into all the details, but there are certain sections that are identified as basic emotions, body basics, language. In general, the frontal lobes are the youngest, and the oldest is the cord, which is still part of the brain. And most of our sensory perception comes from the back of the brain, and the front is very critical, the frontal lobes. Now, I'm not going to go into this slide in detail, but if you believe in God, these are the parts of the brain that will help identify various aspects of God. Okay. Amygdala can lead to emotional fear of God. Even if we're trained to fear God, it can be unhealthy. So science knows that. And if we're not trained that way, we're trained in God's love, it can be incredibly healing. Now, this kind of relates to the interesting thing I found, the cosmos and the brain. They're both gigantic. Brain, 100 billion cells, 100,000 dendrites, 100 trillion dendrites. And what Father was just saying, very interesting. In the cosmos, physical, visible, 44%, invisible, 96%. The conscious mind, about 5%. The unconscious is 95%. So, this is going to lead us into a very interesting discussion on the conscious and the unconscious.
So this is interesting. That is when I did my study of philosophy and religions. I did a lot of Buddhist studies and also Taoist study. And most of the mystics, the contemplative people like Buddha or like Lao Tzu, like Zhuangzi, they already at that time they were born before Christ, you know, and they all 500 years before Christ, as was Confucius and Lao Tzu. And they already anticipated, they talk about we humans only understand 5%. And that's what when you look at what they intuitively engage into the mysteries of the human body and the whole universe. You talk about it, we did, because I'm now fluent in Chinese. I did a lot of study, research on the book Tao Te Ching in writing. That is incredible. It's more like modern Tao physics. You read that book, and all these things already conceptually was really intuitively attained by these people. These philosophers, it's incredible. So you talk about instantaneous kind of revealing of God's love to all the people of all ages, all time and histories. Maybe at that time they didn't encounter Christ because Christ was not incarnated yet, but they experienced the love of God instantaneously, want to intervene in the history of humankind and to lead us back home to God the Father. So there's a lot of things like that. When I study Buddhism, and when I get into the 9th level subconscious, it's unbelievable. Carl Jung, whether he learned psychology, whether he developed all categories of this psychology, now the whole department of psychology is really rely on Freud and Carl Jung. Carl Jung went to India, that's where he learned all of the terminology of psychology. That's a lot of things.
Well, the brain has various dualities. I don't want this term mixed up with non-dualism. This is something with the brain. And there are a lot of dualities in the brain which forces free will, because we have to make decisions between the right and left hemispheres, because they can sometimes contradict the information we're getting. We have to always deal with present and future. If you're an alcoholic, do you take the alcohol out of the room, out of the house, so that in the future you're not tempted? Multi-stable stimuli. This is those images where you see the two women, two men facing each other, and you see the chalice, the cup, the contradictory. Motion and reason, but I'm going to focus on conscious and unconscious. Now, Phineas Gage was an interesting character. He was a very religious man, went to church regularly, never cursed, didn't drink, didn't womanize. He was a model citizen, and he was the one that placed the charges along in New Hampshire to make way for the railroad. And the charges were every 10 feet, and there was a hole drilled, and then they put dynamite in there, and he tapped it down, and then wired it all together, and they blew it off, and the rock fell off, and we went on. Well, one day, he tapped, and there was dynamite already in the hole. And at that time they called them crowbars, but they were straight. One end was flat, one pointed. It detonated it went through his cheek and out the top of his head. And because it was so quick and it was also hot, it cauterized the wound and he healed. Very unusual. And they exhumed, this was back in the 1800s, late 1800s. And from then on, he womanized, he cursed, he was a horrible person. So as an outsider looking at him, they judged him and they said, "You're evil, you're sinful, you're sin, you're going to hell, da 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 da." You've heard that stuff today, right? Okay. Well, this was a big wound. And the science knows very little about the brain, trust me. But this was an obvious big wound. They could exhume his body, which they did about 30 years ago. And sure enough, his frontal lobes were gone. So the frontal lobes are critical to making moral decisions. Michael May had an accident when he was about a month old and lost his sight. And when he was 45, science had a way of restoring his sight. Now this is very rare in medical journals. And so the doctors didn't know how he was going to react. And so they had his children, his two children, his wife in front of him, whom he had never seen before. They unwrapped the bandages. And he was bombarded with this information. And it was wonderful. The only problem was that the next day he couldn't remember what his wife looked like. He couldn't tell the difference between the forest and the trees. He had lack depth of field. Wow. There were a lot of problems. What had happened is in the infancy, when our brain is wiring information into the unconscious, which is the fastest, it causes, he didn't have that benefit. So let's compare them. The unconscious is fast, automatic, implicit, heuristic, intuitive, reactive, impulsive, limbic system, and the oldest. Conscious brain, remember the 5% Slow, systematic, explicit, analytic. This is where we make our moral decisions. This is where we store our prejudices, our sinfulness, and our virtues. But we're not conscious of them because we programmed over time. Well, with time, he was able to reprogram his brain, and he didn't have to look for the dimple on his wife's cheek. He didn't have to try to study his wife's face and figure out it was her. Unconsciously, he saw the dimple and it was her. So our unconscious brain is protecting us. If we had to think consciously about breathing, we would die.
And so I want to say something about the influences. You know, sometimes now you have the emotional intelligence. You know, and some people have that emotional intelligence. When you're about to have an accident, and suddenly there was something in you unconsciously telling you that, and you stop maybe 1 second or 2 seconds or 1 minute or 20 seconds before the accident happened. And then I know a friend of mine was driving in the highway up to the mountain in Taiwan, and suddenly he just stopped the car. And he was having an urge within himself, calling him to stop the car. And if he was continue driving that, the rock would fall down and hit the car and kill him. You know, just only 15 seconds away, and he just stopped. And that's the speed of the unconscious. That's the collective unconscious. Maybe there is something that we are communicating with our parents or someone who the loved ones who passed away, who just want to protecting us. Maybe God coming at that moment just give us that kind of very fast signal and telling us to stop. That, I'm just telling you this. It's a lot of things that we don't know about the brain and the mystery about how God intervened in our life. At the level unconscious, at the level collective unconscious, all of the level. Consciously, what we know actually really very little. Only.
There studies on that, and it showed that the foot goes to the brake on the car before the conscious brain.
Yeah, before even you know that he's stopping. I mean, he just fully funded the whole break. That's it. That's correct.
So all of these prejudices are stored in the unconscious. Now, does that mean if we are dealing in these prejudices or sins, does that mean we're culpable in the eyes of God? Only God knows the answer to that. But obviously, the idea is to get these to come to the conscious brain so we can deal with them. Now, to show you how much confusion there has been, consciousness, the Greek word synedesis means consciousness, which is the external self-awareness. So there's either true or erroneous. I either look out there and see a tree and it really is there, or I think it is there and it isn't. Okay. The conscience is the internal guide, and that's either sincere or insincere. Are you really rationalizing insincerely? Well, the Greeks only have one word for both of these, and those are critically different. Believe it or not, the Romance languages still only have one word. French, Spanish, English is fortunate we have two. So, moral culpability. This is theology. Active omission is morally wrong. Only the informed conscience can determine that. But the full knowledge of a person, if they have full knowledge or full freedom, only God knows that. So, Phineas Gage? Ooh, wow, maybe not. Obviously not. But there are molecular level damages in the brain that we don't understand. That's why we can never judge somebody and say they're going to hell. And most of our brethren in other Christian denominations don't make the distinction between the subjective and the objective. They will, if they see somebody shooting somebody, they'll say that person committed a sin. We as Catholics can't say that. All we can say is that that was morally wrong, and that whether it's a sin in God's eyes, if they're culpable in God's eyes, only God knows, because only God knows these.
So this is profound implication. Should not make judgment. Only God knows that. Right. And the person may be inflicted with a lot of things unconsciously. So we have to be more compassionate.
This is moral. This is way ahead of most of our Christian brethren of other denominations. They don't make this distinction. I do a lot of interfaith dialogue. I haven't seen this distinction in other Christian denominations. Have you, Father?
No, they're more black and white.
Yeah, it's all black and white. So there's a collective vicinity.
Catholics should never be black and white, you know, because we are not God. Don't play the role of God. Yes, we humans. And the humans who submit to the divine guidance and the intervention. That's the lesson we need to learn, you know, humility.
So there is such a thing as collective consciousness, which is what is medicine and science, what do they have to say about it? And collective conscience, which is, well, what is your religious, what do the religions believe? What is the state law, civil law, etc.
And religion also has its own distortions, its own kind of prejudices. So you have to be careful. I mean, sometimes some people are and interpreting the teaching of the church. And maybe his interpretation is not the church teaching. It is his own kind of seeing the church teaching, understanding the church teaching. But because he has the conscious or unconscious prejudice against that teaching, you know. So that's why you need to come aware of yourself. So I just invite you all need to learn to cultivate a deep love for Jesus and to remain in Him, to let Him change you, transform you to become more like Him. That's when you are doing that, then you can present to the people the teachings of Christ.
Now, I'm not going to go to all this, but when you do it in form conscience, and these are not your order of priority, but you've got to consider a lot of things: religious teaching, sacred scripture, natural law, civil law, a whole bunch of things. And so it's all got to be considered. Now, omnibenevolent God, frontal lobe, stop judging that you may not be judged. Unconscious brain, stop judging, you will not be judged, stop condemning, and you will not be condemned, forgiven, you will be forgiven. The science shows us we've got to do this. There's no other option. Okay, there are research conferences. I've given presentations at each of these, but I won't dwell on. Secular Buddhist conference is here. This was Disorders of Consciousness by an expert. And these are dualistic, these are non-dualistic. Well, there have been conferences brought here to Houston, Harvard, University of Chicago, and there's a huge amount of research on the healing effects of a belief system. And it's compiled in a handbook of religion and health. This is the gospel book, basically, which compiles all the research. I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Coaching, and then Bob Hesse is also the young professors at the university, and we also have the Spirituality Institute. And you remember that. So between the two places, we really doing a lot of conferences, inviting the top scholars, top scientists, and to come all together, do a lot of presentation. And these are lifetime research kind of insight that they have to present. So I'm just asking you, you're like, well, Bob and I continue to study and learn all the time. It doesn't matter where you are, you have to learn, you have to study, because the speed of knowledge that I know is so fast. And then you are not stop learning, you don't know. And the more you learn, the more you become humble, the more you recognize you don't know anything. Okay? And that is the heart of the scholar. You have to become a scholar by that nature. You have to learn. I'm so happy to return to, after being away 15 years ago, back to university, and I'm amidst of all of the professors and the research scholars. So it's good to be there to learn, and you recognize you don't know a lot. So just keep learning. There are three areas of the religious research. One, if you have a faith belief, you heal better, and you have a much better sense of well-being. If you attend church regularly, once a week, and now this is not saying any particular religion, okay, then you live up to 7 years longer. If you prayer practice, you have a prayer practice, and I was involved in this research, you have lesser chance of depression.
Do you know why? Tell me why? Because you are relating to God, and God pouring His own energy into your life, and then He gives you that healing, the liberating and transforming power, and remove the chaos, make chaos become order.
I'm going to be focusing mostly on prayer, but just very quickly, these are all the studies that have shown religious involvement improves. It's just incredible. 3,000 medical articles, etc. It's just unbelievable the amount of research. So this is solid by Harvard, University of Chicago, Institute for Spirituality, Health. Fertility rates. I think this is important. As we're in the biology of consciousness section, well, now that we're conscious of what's going on around us, one of them is fertility rates. That's defined as a number of babies born per woman, okay? Now, in the US, it's 2.1. Now, to maintain a culture, you have to have at least 2.1 to have that culture survive. No culture has survived at less than 1.9 here. Maintain a culture, okay? Now, US is about 1.6, but with immigration, it's 2.1. France, not good. 1.6 in England, look at Italy, where Rome and Vatican are. 1.2. 1.1 in Spain. What this means is that cultures of death, which includes abortion, birth control, and capital punishment, ultimately die out themselves. Their belief system is not
And
self-sustaining.
also homosexuality, that homosexual relation, marriage,
That dies out eventually too. Now, I'm not saying there would be no longer homosexuals, but the mentality of that being okay would die out basically. Cohabitation sociology. You're going to run into people that are living together. I did marriage prep, and the way I approached it is I would say, I'm here to help you have a long-lasting marriage. Do you agree with that? And he said, oh yeah. So that's the only reason I'm here. So instead of preaching to them morals, they know, they're not stupid. I said, let's talk about the science, okay? If you live together, premarital sex, obviously, then you have a 40% greater chance of not getting married. 50% greater divorce rate. If you're in Europe and you live together, and then get married, there's an 80% greater divorce rate. If you're a greater divorce, if it's a non-virgin bride, greater divorce, male infidelity if cohabitated, greater female infidelity if cohabitated, the list goes on. And the uneducated, less than high school diplomas or whatever, have a higher rate of cohabitation. So this is something that when I get the people's attention, then I'll say, oh, by the way, that happens to be Catholic Church teaching. Oh,
So how did they get this percentage number? They did a lot of research, correct?
Yeah.
They did the research.
So there's a lot of research on that. Now, there's more recent research that started to say, well, they try to eliminate things which skews the results because some people don't want to see this. So even scientists have their bias. Meditation practice. This was from Herb Benson of Harvard. He's done this research. We can go into that. Now, in the terms of the terminology, meditation is from the Latin meditatio, meaning to engage the imagination, to think. Our modern terminology of meditation has a much broader meaning. So the term has been absconded with by other faith beliefs. It's also been, meditation has helped, prayer is one of the highest level things used for prayer management. It's surveys. These are the sources. Now, this is where we're going to loop back on the universe. This Penrose guy, you ever hear of him? Brilliant guy. He was the one that Hawking went to get his math, because Hawking didn't have the math he needed, so he got advice from Penrose, who was also at Cambridge. I met Penrose, he's 87, in Switzerland about 6 weeks ago. Guy's brilliant. He's trying to come up with a quantum mechanical, he's a quantum physicist, quantum physical explanation of consciousness. That's where the research is going. Consciousness seems to be such an important phenomenon, I simply cannot believe it is something accidentally conjured up by a complicated computation. It is the phenomenon whereby the universe's very existence is made known. One can argue that a universe governed by laws that do not allow for consciousness is no universe at all. You see us looping back from the physics of the universe down to the brain. That's where the science is going. And of course, Teilhard de Chardin, the most telling and profound way of describing the evolution of the universe is undoubtedly to trace the evolution of love. And there is almost a central longing for communing with others who have a large vision, the immense fulfillment of friendship between those engaged in furthering the evolution of consciousness as a quality impossible to describe. Father Teilhard de Chardin.
You remember that word, evolution of love.
Yeah.
And that is more important.
Okay, now here's the problem. This is science, did studies on this. What science studies on was they interviewed people. They said, "Well, what religion are you?" They just took a survey. What religion? What political party? What academic level are you at? What they kind of whatever. So then they gave them a series of multiple choice, and they said, "We have done studies, and we know that if here are two studies that confirm that being a Catholic is better than being a Buddhist. And then there are two studies that being a Buddhist is better than being a Catholic, or political parties." Okay. People would statistically pick the options that their preconceived ideas fit before they started, which is confirmation bias. This means that it's not irrational, it's automatic, it's unintentional, it's not deliberate, it's not deception, it's empathy. It's cognitive mechanistic, it's evidence confirming beliefs, rational primacy effect, illusory correlation. Basically, people in their unconscious are picking the things that meet their preconceived ideas.
Yeah, that is so important right now because it's the unconscious bias. And this is really control all of us. None of us are born with like the planned habit. But all of us have a lot of biases. We have our physical, our brain, and our emotional, and our psychological, all at different levels have different biases trying to control and try to manipulate us. So sometimes learning is what? Come to know oneself and to be aware of these biases so that we will not become slave to these biases. Why do I see you? Suddenly I never interact with you, but I don't like you. Because you maybe, there's some bias in me that's causing me to make a kind of adjustment about you and make a decision about you. So a lot of things going on. So we need to be able to be more aware of this kind of, what do you call that? Confirmation bias.
Now, the question is, how do we get confirmation bias out of our unconscious into our conscious brain? That's the challenge. And how do we do it? Well, we're going to get into that. Confirmation bias. Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Everything goes into a person comes from outside, not from the outside. So basically, these evils are coming from our unconscious from within. And we're unconscious of them, so how can we do it? That's why habitual sin is such a problem, because it's buried even deeper in the unconscious. Now, the question is, how do we get out of that bad situation? I didn't think I was going to do this, but I'll tell you, I do some prison ministry, and we were in prison, and this black convict came to me, and he didn't want to share this with the other people because they're very private. They don't know what they could get beat up for some sharing ideas. But he trusted me. He said, I don't know what to do. I feel scared when I get around a policeman. And he said, and I know that's wrong, but I don't know what to do. And I said, well, that doesn't mean that you are a white policeman. And I said, that doesn't mean you're a racist. Well, that's not what you hear in today's press. I said, that merely means that you had a bad experience and your brain is trying to protect you from having that again. So it buries that into the unconscious. Then I challenged him. I said, now, a white woman is afraid of black men. Is she racist? And the answer is the same as I gave you. She had a bad experience. She's trying to protect herself. That doesn't make her a racist. She's got that buried in her unconscious. Both of you have to get that out of the unconscious. Prayer is the answer.
Really?
There are two types, discursive cataphatic and contemplative apophatic. We're all used to the first one. We know how to pray with our mind and thoughts, and then sometimes use our mouth, perhaps too much. Please, you can tell I'm doing that right now. These two are shared by all theistic faiths. And centering prayer facilitates contemplative or mystical prayer. That's what I wanted to get across. So the quotable agreement here is our contemplation of him is a participation in his contemplation of himself. Wow. Merton, Travis. I never met him, but I was at the monastery he was at, but he was a hermit. Now, are you ready for this one? Einstein. You think mystical experiences are just by religious people? No, they're much more common than you realize. Matthew 6:6 is probably one of the most important. It should be M-E-T-T. Matthew 6:6 is when Jesus was asked how do you pray. He didn't say the Our Father first. He said, when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your heavenly Father in secret, and he will hear you in secret. Do not be like the pagans who use many words. Whoa. Then, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you're going to use words, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, etc. And this is probably the most mystical line of all at the beginning of the Song of Solomon. He went about doing his good and healing all, etc. So, there's prayer definitions are simpering prayer method to facilitate contemplative prayer opening whole being to God. Now, the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and this is a guy who wrote the longest work in Christian antiquity, and it became the main reference book by the rules by Saint Benedict. He established the rules of etiquette for the convents and monasteries. And what Cassius says, the mind rejects the whole wealth and abundance of thoughts, the soul then pours out to God wordless prayers. This is 4th century, and he was acting like a press reporter. He was going interviewing the nuns and monks in Egypt, who were the predecessors to the convents and monasteries. Now, these are the guidelines for practicing centered prayer. We're not going to do it now. You pick a sacred symbol or image, word or image, is your intention to be with God. You sit in a comfortable position, introduce the symbol of God's presence. Then as thoughts come, and they will because we're human, if you have 1,000 or 2, it doesn't matter. Every time you become aware of the thoughts or aware you're engaged with the thoughts, you ever so gently return to the sacred word, which is your way of saying, I'd rather be with you, God, than even my own thoughts. I got involved in this because my prayer life was horrible. I was telling God what I needed, when I needed, and how I needed it. I basically didn't need God. I was giving him instructions, okay? And then there's a gentle readjustment. And there are a lot of different thought categories. I'm not going to go through them because we don't have a lot of time, but there are a bunch of different thought categories. But most of them are pleasant, but one of them can be unpleasant. It's the unloading of the unconscious. That's where we're headed. We're trying to get away from that confirmation bias. Physical effects, a lot of benefits. Less sleep means you don't need as much sleep. Not that you can't sleep. Spiritual effects, the gifts of the spirit. Most common one is peace. Psychological effects, there's a focus for the groups for the false self, which is depends on energy centers, esteem, power, security, things that are not going to give us happiness. To the true self, the union with the indwelling God. It's called centering prayer because God dwells within. Brain scans of Franciscan nuns doing centering prayer show neuroplasticity by Newberg. He was Jewish, by the way. Now here's interesting. Transcendent consciousness shares some things with near-death experiences. Some similar attributes. And why shouldn't it? Because both of those are transcendent states of consciousness. In other words, these are the transcendent states between this life and the next. So the first is a paranormal out-of-body. Near-death experiences talk about that. The same is true of real mystical experiences. Now by that I don't mean the normal peace we might feel if we had centered prayer, but there are less than 5% of the people that actually have a really profound experience. I'm talking about these are rare, both of these are rare. The next attribute they share is a cognitive timelessness in NDE, and the spiritual contemplative experience, prayer seems like 5 minutes, it was 20 or 30. Effective peace and a wholeness, a sense of perfection, and then a transcendent divine spiritual sense. And all of them share these, and there's actually a scientific scale used to measure these, called the Grayson scale. Okay, here's the research we just finished in Cuba. And And it's a long story, I'm going to make it short. Basically, he just presented it at the Science of Consciousness Conference in Interlaken, Switzerland, about 6 weeks ago. And they are still searching for consciousness. That's where I happened to have met Penrose. And we first had to pick a tool. We picked this tool because it's important to get a tool that's very good in spatial, showing us where in the brain something's happening, and temporal, very good with speed. So we picked that tool, quantitative electroencephalogram tomography, and the conclusions were this. Significant, that's the tool we used, correlations across broad frequency ranges between remembering NDE and SCE. We had to do remembering because you're not going to catch it in the act. But my neuroscientist, MD, who is the guy who did this, and I'm not a neuroscientist, assured me that is pretty valid because that's the basis of PTSD. People remember. They hear a firecracker and they are brought right back to Vietnam or whatever in the war. And consistent with the Grayson scale attributes, most frequencies are higher with SC consistent that the SC was not dying. In other words, the remembrance was stronger for SCE. And I'm not going to go through all these frequencies. Now, there are transcendent events. I can't believe it covered both frequencies. There are transcendent events that we just talked about. And I wasn't the first one to write about these. Dr. Moody described this. He's a classic in 1975 for near-death experiences. Dr. William James described mysticism in varieties of religious experiences long ago as 1902. But scientists at those times were still reluctant. Well, now there's this conference I just talked about in Switzerland. Science is on top of this subject. They're going after consciousness like there's no tomorrow. And they cannot put their arms around it. I listened to the whole conference and then just not quite there. But yeah, I give a presentation on this. I just did it more, I gave a brain scans and all that stuff. But is there another transcendent event that shares these same attributes? Notice outside space and outside time. Now think back to the physics into creation. Give me the answer. What's the next event? The singularity, the Big Bang. It's dimensionless. There's no material there. It's the size of a photon in the eyes of physicists. It's timeless because there's no light. Now, entropy is a measure of disorder in the universe. In the second law of thermodynamics, most people know it, it says that entropy is always increasing. Well, entropy was zero at the singularity. It was perfectly ordered. And the forces were unified by Einstein's equation. Einstein's theory led to these singularity attributes of the Big Bang. Why shouldn't these be all transcendent events between this world and the next? Why shouldn't we be drawn by God and given a taste of what it's like outside space and time? Because when we are letting go of our thoughts from our conscious brain, then that allows room for the conscious brain to unload. I've seen it happen. Talked to 10 people. 3 months later, I run into one of them. I said, how's it going? He said, well, not too good. I said, what happened? He said, well, during the prayer, I remembered what really happened to me in Vietnam. Well, he didn't go into detail, but it was a PTSD moment. I said, what did you do? He said, I ever so gently let it go and return to God. The divine healer was helping him. I talked to him, I told that to the head of the psychiatric department of Baylor. His eyes popped out. He couldn't believe it. I taught 10 people centered prayer. 3 of them had near-death experiences previously in life. I didn't know that. At the end of their first 20-minute sit, the 3 of them started to share that they had actually re-experienced their near-death experience in that 20-minute prayer session. We're all headed there. We're all headed there. I've been looking for somebody that hasn't died, and I haven't found one yet.
So it's a perfect place to end today. And we have to thank Deacon Bob Hesse for his incredible presentation. This was what I shared this morning regarding Jesus' redemption. Really bring us the three kinds of power: the power of healing, the power of liberating, and the power of transformation or transcending. And I think just like you said, basically when you enter into Christ, you remain in Christ, you become united with Christ, you enter into that singularity of God, the Trinity. And in that moment, then you experience that sense of healing. Healing means sometimes you let the Holy Spirit go deep down into your unconscious level, or different levels of unconsciousness, and to begin to do the works of healing. God will work very hard, trying to heal all of the wounds and hurts of our past, of our unconsciousness. And then we need to be willing to empty, to let go. And then prayer, contemplative prayer, basically release your defensive mechanism. So let God enter your life and let God do the cleaning, the healing, and the liberating, and open up all of the tie, the knots, yeah? And then let you free, liberate you, and transform you, and make you become able to experience the transcendent aspect of your life. You know, it is really. I mean, science and theology are coming together. I was at Berkeley, and I went to many conferences on theology and science, you know. And when you listen to all the scientists talking about quantum physics, you know, and chaos theory. I mean, you just recognize that these people are really affirming the mystics of the ages, you know, of different cultures, different religions, talking about their experience of the divine power in their life. You know, the transcendence aspects. Karl Rahner is a famous theologian of the church. He talked about transcendental kind of desire of human nature and also the historicity. We all are conditioned by time and space, but yes, and two, the desire for God, we can transcend our own time and space and go into that kind of union with the universe so that we can experience the oneness with God. And the oneness in love, and that's what's been talked about, the evolution of love.
Okay, this is kind of a wrap up, basically what they're all talking about, which wraps up the first and second parts of the talk.
Thank you so much. If you still have interest, the second part of the presentations, we go into even more profound.
And I'll do more questions and answers.
Yeah, and we have a lot more questions because I think the more we study, even today, do you feel that science and theology are against one another? No. And really, science helps us to understand and to attain that sense of awe, you know? Wow! When you see all these numbers, how can the mind capture all these? The universe, the galaxies, and the black hole, and all these things are so infinite, and we cannot. And our mind is so small. But this mind is so small, but it's almost like the universe, you know. And that's incredible. How complicated our brain is. Right? But you know, sometimes we think that we know it. I just said to you, we know only maybe 4 or 5% of it, and then we think that we know all. And that is the arrogance of human mind, and that's what makes us commit sins. And the devil can begin to take advantage of our own arrogance, and then mislead us and distort us. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.